Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Freshwater Stewardship Community webinar. We're very excited to have Dr. Willow English with us today from Safe Wings Ottawa as our keynote speaker. My name is Monica Seidel. I'm the Communications and Fundraising Manager at Watersheds Canada, and we also have Nicole Dubé to the side here today, helping in the chat and also with the Q&A. So if you are having any tech problems, any questions about Safe Wings or Watersheds Canada, or you have a question that you would like to submit privately, you can message her through Zoom directly. You will notice that everyone's mics and videos are turned off during the call. So we just ask that if you have a question or a comment, that you please put those in the chat. For those of you who might not be familiar with our organization, Watersheds Canada is based in Eastern Ontario, and we deliver national programs that focus on freshwater stewardship and education. So we have a number of habitat restoration programs. One of them is pictured on the screen. It's the Natural Edge, which is on the left-hand side of the screen, and it is our shoreline planting program. So we work with shoreline property owners, municipalities, and community groups to plant their shoreline properties with native plants. We also have a number of education programs. So the one that's pictured on the right here is our classroom programming, where we go into different schools and deliver curriculum-linked modules. So the one you can see there is our native plant unit, which we'll be delivering next month. And so these are just two of our examples of our different programs. If you are interested in learning more about our other programs, I'd invite you to go to our website, which is watersheds.ca/r-work. A couple of different ways that you can get involved with our organization this spring. The first is the Natural Edge, which is that shoreline planting program. So Watersheds Canada, as I said, is headquartered in Eastern Ontario, and so we deliver the program regionally in our area. And this spring, we are delivering our starter kits. So this is everything that a shoreline property owner would need to restore their property, including resource guides, a custom planting plan, and native plants. If you are not located in Central Eastern Ontario, that is okay. There are different regional delivery partners located across the country. And so if you email Chantel at naturaledge@watersheds.ca, she will either book a site visit with you if you are in our area, or if you are somewhere else, she will direct you to the right person. So this is a great way to take action on your own property, either this spring or in the fall when the planting seasons are. And so if you have any questions or just want to learn more about the program, I encourage you to email Chantel. Another way to get involved over the next 2 years is through our fish habitat restoration program. So we are currently looking for delivery partners across Central Eastern Ontario to restore in-water fish habitat. You can see in the photo we have a brush bundle that's ready to get deployed into the lake. So this is a bundle of a bunch of sticks and branches that will provide critical in-water fish habitat. So these woody debris areas are really important for fish to be able to spawn, to feed, and to hide. And so we are putting these areas back into the lake so that fish and other species have these important habitat areas. So if you think that you have a group of people, a community association, a fish and game club that would be interested in restoring in-water fish habitat, I encourage you to go to watersheds.ca/r-work/habitat-programs to learn more about the woody debris piles, or you can email Melissa Dakers, who is our Habitat and Stewardship Program Manager, and learn more about this opportunity. And you can reach her at info@watersheds.ca. Something that is coming up in the next few weeks is a new education toolkit, and it will be focusing on light pollution and different actions that people can take to protect our night skies. And so this will be available for free download in the coming weeks on our website. If any of you have been with our organization for a few months, you would have seen our road salt education toolkit that went out over the winter months. And so this will be very similar in format with different blogs, policy review documents, infographics, and a slide deck. And so you can use that to learn more about lake pollution and drive some local community change around it. Another practical way that you can partner with our organization is through our symbolic adoptions program. So this is a way for you to help directly specific species and habitat types that are found around Canada's lakes and rivers. Each of the symbolic adoptions comes with a 5x7 postcard featuring artwork done by a Canadian artist. And they also come with a blank honor card so that you can give it as a gift or just keep it for yourself, honestly. Some of the artwork is quite stunning, and it is all different Canadian artists that are featured. And so this is a really great way to give a special gift for someone, especially around the holidays or birthdays, but also have a really impactful contribution for our lakes, rivers, and the wildlife that live there. So if you're interested in checking out our symbolic adoptions, you can go to watersheds.ca/gifts, and all of those symbolic adoptions are eligible for a Canadian tax receipt. Finally, I just want to briefly go over the freshwater stewardship community, which is the program that we are all in this Zoom room for today. This community was launched in 2021 and has since hosted a wide variety of webinars and speakers. And so we've archived all of those webinars and the different education handouts that go along with them on our website, which is watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. It would have been the website that you went to register for today's webinar. And so if you just scroll down that page a little bit more, you'll see a bunch of category boxes, and you can click on the topic that you're interested in learning more about and access all of those webinars and handouts. You'll be part of a very large and growing community. So over the past 3 years, the freshwater stewardship community has reached over 9,500 people in 17 countries. It's been really lovely to see the growing number of people accessing all of these free resources and sharing them with their community group, their municipality, their schools, and just really looking at how they can take local action for their freshwater. So thank you for being a part of this community. Here are some of the menu boxes that I was talking about. So we've grouped all of our past webinars and handouts into some different categories, and all of these are available for free download and for free sharing. So if you have somewhere that you can post a webinar or put a handout, we encourage you to share it as widely as possible and to help as many people take action and learn about different topics that pertain to our freshwater health. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. We have Dr. Willow English from Safe Wings Ottawa. So Willow has been working with Safe Wings for 7 years to reduce bird mortality from collisions with glass through advocacy, education, and research. In addition to working with collisions, Willow is a bird survey biologist, coordinating Canada-wide surveys of breeding birds to better understand population trends and prioritize conservation efforts. She has a special love for the Arctic and has spent over a decade working on the tundra with shorebirds. She completed her PhD at Carleton University, working on Arctic breeding shorebird migration, following a Master's of Science at Simon Fraser University and a Bachelor of Science at the University of Victoria. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Willow.
Great. Thank you very much, Monica. I'm just bringing up my presentation here. And make sure we start at the beginning. Right. Great. Now, I'm very happy to give this talk, especially with groups that are working on habitat restoration, because it's so important that if we are doing things like planting native plants and trying to draw birds into an area, we make sure that that area is safe for the birds that we're drawing in, or even if it's sort of incidental, even if we're trying to restore shoreline for fish, that's often going to bring birds into an area, and we want to make sure that that doesn't have a negative impact on those birds. Also, apologies, I'm just getting over being sick, so I'll be taking lots of sips of water so I don't start coughing. So just a brief outline of today's talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem, why birds collide, why certain buildings are more dangerous than others. I'll talk a little bit about light pollution, which seems to be a topic that will be covered in a bit more detail in another talk, and also about how collisions can be prevented at a large scale, but also at a single home scale. And then I'll talk a little bit about how you can help birds as an individual. So a lot of the numbers I'm going to be talking about today are from Ottawa because that's where I am and that's the data that I have. But this is really a worldwide problem. And just to give an idea of the extent of this problem, 1 billion birds are thought to be killed annually in North America. Um, Millions of them are in Canada, probably more in the US, simply because they have more buildings and more birds. This picture is from one of the displays that Safe Wings does every year, and it shows just a small percentage of the birds that hit buildings in Ottawa. As an example of what a single building can do, we estimate that the worst building in Ottawa kills about 7,000 birds a year. So just to give you a snapshot of what we see in Ottawa, our volunteers document about between 4,000 to 5,000 collisions every year. But we know that this is only a very small percentage of those that are colliding in Ottawa. We think that at buildings that we actually monitor regularly, we're still only getting about 5 to 15% of the birds that collide. And of course, we can't monitor most buildings. We don't monitor residential buildings, of course, because people would object to us walking around their houses. And so the actual estimate for what happens in Ottawa every year is a very conservative 250,000, 250,000 birds colliding in Ottawa. And this is very diverse. It's not just one species or one group of species. Since 2014, we've documented 144 species colliding, and that includes 14 species at risk. So here a little bit more about the diversity, what we see. This is just 1 year at Ottawa, gives you a bit of a breakdown of the groups that we're seeing. I would say by far the largest every year is the warblers. We do have a lot of warbler species, but they are, I would say, overrepresented in the data. But we also have a lot of sparrows, chickadees, that varies from year to year, thrushes, kinglets, woodpeckers, nuthatches, lots of raptors, 46 individuals of species at risk. So these are often things like Canada warbler, wood thrush. We've had eastern whippoorwill, common nighthawk, chimney swift, barn swallow. So a lot of these species that are really declining quickly. But we also get species that you wouldn't think would collide. In some years, we've had multiple turkeys. You can see the one in the middle picture there. That one was in downtown Ottawa, and it hit a building right downtown because someone had an off-leash dog, and it spooked it, and it flew into mirrored glass. And so besides the turkeys, we also get the occasional duck, shorebird, cuckoos, that sort of thing. So it really is a widespread problem across many, many different species. Now you may be wondering, if 250,000 birds are hitting windows in Ottawa each year, why aren't you seeing dead birds littered on the sidewalk? And I would say the number one reason for that is scavengers. So these are animals like crows, gulls, ravens, foxes, skunks. Lots of animals are happy to get a free meal. And to talk about how good they are about this, the gulls and the crows, they know which buildings in downtown Ottawa are bad for collisions, and they'll sit at the top and just wait for things to hit. I have watched a bird hit high up on a building and be caught by a crow and eaten before it actually hit the ground. So that one is really, one that we don't have much of a chance to document. But in addition to the scavengers, sometimes they fall on rooftops or overhangs. They can be hidden by vegetation at the bottom of the glass. We see people sweeping up birds off the ground all the time in downtown Ottawa. And a lot of the cases, they'll survive the initial crash and then they'll fly away and die elsewhere. And that's something I'll be talking about a little bit more at the end. Now, when a bird hits a window, a vast majority of them die almost immediately. And this is actually, to me, it's surprising that it's not a higher percentage. If you think about running as fast as you can into a wall of glass and think about how hurt you would be, well, birds are flying a lot faster and they're a lot more breakable than people. So we see birds that do survive, that 30%, they tend to have injuries like head trauma or concussion, just like a person would if they ran headfirst into something. Internal bleeding is quite common, as is vision loss, especially in some species like owls. We commonly see things like corneal ulcers that don't look obviously like an injury, just if you're looking at an injured bird, but they can prevent them from seeing and hunting. And that's one of the reasons that many birds that they're surviving the initial collision can die later from either the injuries themselves or because they're just simply unable to take care of themselves and unable to avoid predators or find enough food. Now, birds matter to me a lot. I love seeing them. It makes me happy to hear birds singing in spring when the snow is melting and I start to see flocks coming back. But they really also have an important role to play in our ecosystems. Pest control is one of the biggest things they do. They eat a lot of insects, and there's actually been studies done in the boreal forest where a lot of our timber comes from, and they netted off a section of forest that meant that birds couldn't get in and eat insects. And then they measured the effect that had on the wood and found that it grows a lot more slowly and is a lot lower quality. So we really rely on them as pest control and pest control that works for the payment of the insects that they find. In addition to this pest control, they're also really important for environmental cleanup. Birds like turkey vultures clean up roadkill or birds that have died from botulism and prevent that from spreading through the ecosystem. They're also important for pollination and seed dispersal, so helping to keep a healthy ecosystem, as well as being a source of food for other wildlife. And unfortunately, it's not arrows are declining. Things like juncos, which are still fairly common, are also still declining very rapidly. And glass in buildings is one of the leading causes of bird deaths. Now, many people source of bird mortality, and that's true, but they also combine together with windows, and that many of the birds that cats catch actually hit a window first, and that's why they're on the ground and vulnerable. And we are seeing more and more glass in the environment. If you look at houses and office buildings that were built, 50 years ago, for the most part, they have a lot less glass than the ones that are currently being built. And this is based on society's perception of wanting more light. As someone who has worked in a glass box, it's not always a good thing. There's lots of glare, and it's usually either super hot or super cold. But there's various reasons, including the fact that glass is often more cheap. So we're seeing a lot more glass, and that's leading to more collisions. So let's move on to why birds are colliding with glass. So to birds, glass is an invisible hazard, and there's two ways that they get fooled by glass. The first is the transparency problem, and this is essentially that birds can see through the glass, they're trying to get to the other side, and they don't realize it's there, and so they fly into the glass. The second problem is reflections. So they see reflected trees, as you can see in this photo, and they think they're real, and they try and fly towards them, only to collide with the glass. I'll talk a little bit more about these individual issues. So glass walkways are one of the biggest sources of transparency-related bird mortality. You can see in the picture at the top there is a 3-story glass walkway at the National Gallery in Ottawa. And something that makes it even more dangerous, besides 3 stories of glass, is that there's trees and green space on either side. So birds are really trying to get from one tree to the other and not realizing that there's something in the way. And this walkway has actually been treated. So this is an old picture, but it was really lethal for birds. Unfortunately, the glass walkway at the blood services has not been treated and continues to be a problem for birds. And this one, as you can see, you have trees and green space on either side, and birds just don't see that they can't make it through that glass. Now, glass railing panels are also a big issue. These are really the bane of the existence of people who work with collisions because they are so common, and people seem to really love them and put them in places like in this marsh down here because they want people to see the animals, see the birds. Well, they're also killing the birds. It really depends how dangerous they are based on what's on either side. Below, it's going to be more dangerous because the birds are going to get to either side, whereas the one above may be less dangerous because there's not much on the other side besides a few potted plants that the birds may try and fly towards. Not saying that the one at the top isn't a problem, but definitely less so than the one at the bottom. Now, indoor vegetation is something that works with transparency to make windows more dangerous. I'm sure many of you have potted plants, and probably most of those are near the window. And birds don't always understand that they're on the other side of an impermeable barrier. If you look at the picture below, you can see that it's actually hard to tell which plants there are on the inside or the outside of the glass. And birds have trouble telling that, and they will try and get at the ones on the inside and collide with that glass. Transparency is also an issue when we have corners with glass on both sides. And this is becoming more and more common as people are using more glass in construction. So basically, they're trying to take a shortcut through that corner to try and get to the other side, not realizing that there's something common there. Additionally, in certain housing designs, we also see that there's windows on either side of the house and birds can see straight through. I know that this was a problem in the house I lived in growing up, and we commonly had collisions and didn't really know how to stop them. So transparency is more than just glass, or sorry, it's more than just buildings. We have lots of examples that aren't necessarily part of a building or part of the integral features of a building, such as this railing, where birds can fly from either side. This is common with porticos, door entries. We see a lot of this, but even little structures like bus stops, smoking shelters can be a really big issue in terms of collisions simply because the birds are trying to go through them. So, all right. So let's move on to reflectivity, which is the other main source of collisions. So birds see these reflections as basically extensions of habitat. They think that it's real. And you can see in some of these pictures just how real the reflections look, especially with mirrored glass. But all glass can be somewhat reflective depending on the light conditions or the angle. And you can also see in the picture in the bottom left there, the one on the, let's see if I can highlight this, where we have a tree that's reflected there, but we also have this fly-through condition where the transparency is an issue. So you can have both transparency and reflectivity in the same glass really at the same time. Now, glass is the major problem here, but it's not just glass. With COVID, we saw a lot of barriers to separate people, especially in outdoor areas, like this picture in the bottom right, which was trying to keep groups of outdoor dining separate. And these are also a problem for birds. Anything that is either hard and see-through or reflects is a problem. So we see these metal garage doors in the house, which is in Ottawa. So anything, like I said, that is transparent or reflective can be a problem for birds. Now, I just wanted to do a brief aside here because for the most part, birds are not crashing into the glass on purpose. That seems fairly obvious. But sometimes, especially in the spring, we get people who phone us up at Safe Wings and say, okay, this bird is just flying repeatedly into this window, or, I think it's attacking the window. And this does happen, and the main cause is testosterone. And this is because birds see their reflections in the glass or in mirrors. And if they are a territorial male, they will try and attack it and drive off this interloper. Now, of course, they can't drive it off because it's them. And so they can actually both hurt themselves through the collision, but exhaust themselves trying to fight off an enemy that won't leave. And the way to deal with this kind of issue is slightly different because it's temporary in that you can really just cover up whatever they're attacking for the short term with newspaper, wax paper, that sort of thing. And in a week or so, when the testosterone levels start to go down, they tend to stop. All right, so let's move into what makes a building lethal. If you look at these two buildings, I'm sure most of you would guess that the one on the right is more dangerous for birds. And that's because of a lot of factors, which we'll go over. But just to highlight a few right now, in the one on the right, we have a lot more glass. We have a lot more vegetation, and we have a water source. And these are all specific features of buildings that make them more dangerous to birds. And if you throw in a bird feeder, it really ticks all the boxes for making a building really dangerous. Something that's a bit of a myth in terms of collisions is that skyscrapers are the problem. And that's not actually true. Recent studies have found that high rises are only about 1% of collisions. So they may have a lot more per building, but there's a lot fewer of them that exist. So really the problems are low rises, like this office building here in Canada, and residences. And this includes, single family, duplexes, that sort of thing. So it's not a matter of just dealing with skyscrapers. And most birds that do hit are not hitting high up in the air. It's not a matter of them hitting as they're migrating or flying. They generally are hitting at the fourth floor or below because that's where they tend to see reflections of vegetation. If you have really high trees, they may hit a little bit higher up, but in general, they're not hitting at the top of skyscrapers. So one of the first things, and really the major predictor of how many collisions a building is going to have is simply the amount of glass. So this building up at the top here is, I would say more than 50% glass there. So it's going to be a problem. Same with the one down below. We've got huge amounts of windows, and you can look and you can see that there's reflections of both the trees in front of them. But if you look closely, you can see that you can actually see through to the other side of the house. So we have both transparency and reflections being a problem here. Similarly, this picture in downtown Ottawa, you can see these two office buildings, very different generations and styles, and we're going to have a lot more collisions at the one on the left than the one on the right. And that's not to say that we won't get some collisions at the one on the right, but there's definitely going to be fewer. Environmental context is also really important. Even a single tree can make a difference. Actually, about 3 days ago, picked up 20 dead Bohemian waxwings and 5 that survived from a building that was on a main commercial street. It had one tree in front of it, was not near any green space, but it had just enough that there was a tree that reflected, and the birds saw that reflection and flew into it. But environmental context really does make a difference. Birds are drawn to areas of green space, um, but that's not to say that they can't be in areas without a lot of green space as well because of light pollution, which I'll talk about later. But on average, if we look at the buildings in this picture, the one on the top surrounded by forest and other vegetation, and the one on the bottom, which has very limited vegetation, we would definitely predict that the one at the top would have more collisions. And that's not to say that it's not good to have vegetation around housing. We definitely need green space. However, we need to be aware and deal with and mitigate the effect that that can have on birds. So design traps are something that can be really problematic. We have courtyards and other areas that end up with birds that are surrounded by glass on multiple sides. For example, courtyards like the one in the top picture here, they can lure birds in because of the vegetation. And when they try and leave, they have glass on 4 sides. And so the chances of them colliding or flying towards a reflection are much higher than a building that simply has glass on one side facing this vegetation. Down below, we have the 2 sides of this building that are sort of funneling birds towards the bottom, which you can see through to the other side, but it's all glass in there. And so that's acting as a design trap to essentially funnel birds to an area that's dangerous for them. One of the other major predictors of whether a building, especially a house, is going to be dangerous for birds is bird attractants. And these can be ones that we put out on purpose, such as bird feeders or bird baths, but it can also be natural sources like having trees or bushes with berries, anything that draws more birds to an area. And we understand putting your bird feeder next to a window so that you can see it. People put up bird feeders because they like to see birds. But essentially, what you're doing there is making a trap by luring birds to an area that's unsafe for them. Now, I'll just take a minute or two to talk about some other dangers to birds that we see in areas dominated by human use. These aren't related to windows, but I thought I would highlight them just because people should know more about them. Guy wires, anything that has sort of lines coming out that are thin and maybe less visible to birds, especially in low light conditions, can be dangerous. Window wells are something that we see that can be really dangerous, especially for fledgling birds or things like ducklings that can't fly. These are essentially are problems for animals getting stuck in them and not being able to get out and starving. They can also be a problem for mammals, in addition to birds, as well as amphibians, reptiles, anything that can get in there and can't get out. Open pipes, flues, and vents are something that you may not think about, but a lot of birds are what's known as cavity nesters. And this means that they generally nest in holes in trees, but they don't limit themselves to natural cavities, such as ones that are excavated by woodpeckers. They'll look for anything that resembles a natural cavity. And so we get calls every spring, especially with people with starlings, owls, woodpeckers that end up in their fireplaces because they go down the chimney, or even things like this pipe. Or I had a friend who had a gazebo like this, and it had sort of a hollow legs. And when he lifted it up at the end of the season to put it away, he was horrified to see that there was quite a number of dead chickadees inside. And they had gone in to investigate what looked like a nice cavity to nest, and then they couldn't get out. And the way these differ from natural cavities is because they tend to be not textured on the inside. And so normally if a bird goes in a cavity in a tree and it's too narrow for them to flap, there's enough texture for them to climb out using their feet. But something like a metal pole or a chimney, uh, there may not be enough texture for them to get a grip and get out. They can also be a problem because birds like to nest in, for example, vents from uh, dryers, and that can cause a fire hazard. So it's in both your benefit and the bird's benefit to make sure that these have a grill over them. Mesh or netting is also a major problem for birds. We see every year, birds caught in things like this pigeon netting on this apartment building. It's hard to see in this photo, and that is reflected in that it's hard for pigeons to see as well. And so they often will um, get tangled in it, particularly if it's not well maintained and there's sort of bits that are hanging down or not taut. We've had a number of owls that have been rescued from soccer nets. They try and fly through them because at night they're not very obvious and sometimes need to be rescued. And then a lot of people try and put netting around their fruits and veggies and totally understand that you're trying to keep them out, but something like a metal mesh chicken wire works a lot better because birds and other animals are less likely to get stuck in it. And finally, on this little aside, pools. Many people don't think of pools as a hazard to birds, but we see this every spring. Ducklings get in. And even though it's, not a very long distance between the water level and the edge of the pool, it's too much for a small bird that can't fly. And ducklings can't swim forever. And so they will eventually get waterlogged and drown, as well as getting hypothermic. So if anyone has a pool, we highly recommend getting something like this frog log, which is in the bottom left and is a commercial project you can order, but even something like a board in there with a towel to give them some grip can make sure that anything that falls into your pool, be it a duckling, a frog, a chipmunk, can get out. All right, so we're getting back to window collisions. But still not actually talking about windows because there's another thing that makes an area a lot more dangerous for collisions. And it's one of the reasons why we get so many collisions in downtown Ottawa, even though there's really not a lot of green space there. So light is something that affects birds, mainly because they migrate, many of them at night. Birds are disoriented by artificial light, and it can kind of happen in two ways. So this picture shows a memorial for the 9/11 towers, and these are huge spotlights that are shone up at the night sky. And all of those little dots that you can see in there are birds that are disoriented by the light, and they essentially react like moths to a flame, and they will fly around aimlessly until they get exhausted or collide with something. Thankfully, lights like this aren't super common. We see them with things like flares in oil and gas, like this memorial, but they're not super common. And really, most of the issue comes from city glow. And this attracts birds as they're migrating. Many of the birds that migrate at night use the stars and the moon for their navigation. And having all this bright light below them, or even the city glow, like a dull light, widespread light, really throws them off. So they end up being drawn into these cities. And then when we have dawn and it becomes light outside, they sort of realize there's somewhere that they don't want to be. And then they will collide with buildings as they try and leave. So light pollution mitigation is something that needs to be addressed both at a home by home level, but also at a municipal or higher level of government level. Uh, there's a number of studies showing that having brighter lights at your home does not reduce crime or increase human safety. So having your home lit up like a beacon doesn't really help you and can be a major problem for birds. However, if you do want lights, the warmth of the light makes a big difference. Warmer colors tend to be a lot better, and that's something we've seen being an issue as there's been more of a shift towards LEDs for their energy efficiency because a lot of them are these cooler colors. What can we do to mitigate light pollution? One of the big things we can do is design the lighting that we do have and that we do need to mitigate light pollution. These two pictures there show different types of street light installations, and they really make a big difference in terms of what is lost to the surrounding area as light pollution versus what is available for what we actually want that light for. It's also very helpful if you control the lights with motion sensors or timers, so the lights are only on when they need to be. And even if porch light makes a difference, although we hope to see more on this at a wider scale. All right, so let's move on to preventing collisions. How do we prevent collisions? We have millions of collisions every year. How do we stop them? Well, the first thing we can do is consider bird-friendly architecture. And when you talk about bird-friendly architecture, many people sort of picture a windowless concrete bunker. And that is really far from the truth. All of these buildings were built following bird-friendly design guidelines and would be considered safe for birds. You can see that they still have a lot of glass. A lot of that glass is bird-friendly. And then they're also using some other features like at the top there, you have these wooden struts that help break up the glass. You have at the bottom right some frosted glass that's uh, installed a little bit outside of the transparent glass. So there's lots of opportunities and lots of options for making buildings bird safe without making them lightless boxes. And this is through, as I mentioned, this bird-friendly building materials. Uh, Having this glass that has a pattern on it in the upper left. The one in the upper right is a library here in Ottawa, and you can't see very well from this picture. We're working on getting a better picture. But this little reading room, all of those dots are letters of the alphabet. So it's a really appropriate pattern to have at a library. Having things like on the bottom left, these railings that are metal as opposed to those glass panels makes a big difference. Frosted glass, even these glass cubes have enough frosting that they're safe for birds. So there's lots of ways to get light in while still being safe for birds. Other features that are not related to the glass themselves can be things like grills or louvre, screening that's on the outside or outdoor shades. Even things like these slats, these are not perfect. They're on a building in Ottawa, and I think they're an example of accidental bird friendly. But they are, maybe 6 feet away from the windows, and they provide some privacy because this faces a street. But they also make it less likely that birds are going to hit those windows. So just a few examples that you might recognize. The University of Ottawa has a STEM complex here. It took me a number of years before I realized that the designs were actually eyes. I was a little embarrassed to realize that. But they have a combination of opaque and patterned glass. And they actually make it a lot nicer to be on the inside because you don't get the same glare or the same temperature effects as having just transparent glass. They're actually a really a stunning building as well. So it shows that you can have really attractive buildings that are bird friendly. Place Belle is a building In downtown Ottawa, they had a major retrofit and redesigned the front. And again, it's really hard to see, which is great because, we don't want people to look at a building and say, whoa, what's going on there? But there is lines in the glass in the front, the top there. They've used this frosted glass in the panels down below. And something that is really unfortunate, but at this restaurant, they had this wooden panels, and they have since replaced them with transparent glass ones. And we were very sad to see that because it used to be such a great example of a bird-friendly building, and they've made it less bird-friendly by adding those glass railing panels. Excuse me, I just may sneeze. All right, so moving into making existing buildings bird safe. This is something that can be done at both a large and a small scale. It's hard to do at a larger scale, unless you happen to own that building, but it can be done through monitoring, getting evidence of a problem, and advocating at these large buildings. But something that you really can control is making your own home bird safe. We do use a lot of the same features or the same techniques, so they are applicable across both big and small projects. But first, we'll talk about a few quick fixes. These are things that may help reduce the number of collisions that can be done in, less than an hour, but they really won't solve the problem. So the first thing you can do is if you do have a bird feeder or a bird bath, is placing it really close to your window. And that may seem very counterintuitive because it's putting birds closer to the danger. But where we see a lot of collisions when it comes to bird feeders is when they get startled and they're on the feeder and they fly away really quickly without looking and thinking about where they're going. And if they're very close to the glass, they won't be moving too quickly when they hit it. So you're trying to keep them close to the glass. So if they do hit, they're moving at a slow speed. Moving indoor plants away from windows can be helpful so that birds are not trying to get in at those plants. Even just a couple of feet can make a big difference. Obviously, plants need light, so they can't be too far away, but moving them a little bit further can help. And then closing curtains or blinds can be helpful in some situations because of this transparency issue. Like if you can see from one side of your house through to the other, but they won't really affect collisions that are caused by reflections. Now, these are sort of the basic tenets of how we can make glass bird friendly. We need a dense pattern, so dots or stripes or any other motif. There's some examples on the right-hand side there. They need to be at a fairly high density, and I'll discuss why a bit later. They need to be on the exterior surface, and they need to be high contrast. But really within those criteria, they can be anything. So we're not limited to dots. That's a very common one, but that's not the only possible way of treating glass. So density, why is density important? Well, I'm sure many of you have seen birds trying or flying through forests, and they fly through very small spaces between obstacles like branches. And that's what they're trying to do with glass. They don't understand that a line in one spot on the glass means that there's a big glass panel there with a problem elsewhere on the glass. And so you're basically trying to make that entire area solid for them. And that's why putting up a few decals really doesn't work, is they won't hit where those decals are, but they will hit around them. And you can see on the bottom left there, we have an example of some glass there that has been marked for humans with some lines so humans don't run into it, but birds will try and fly through those markers. So visual markers on glass are really the number one way that we can treat it to make it bird friendly. One of the best ways to do that is feather friendly. This is a great product for do-it-yourself. You can see sort of on the left-hand side of the left picture there, It looks like Scotch tape, and you apply it like that, and then you peel the tape off, and it leaves only the dots behind. And it's also available as a film for commercial installation, and that helps get all the spacing done correctly. Window films are something that is also very effective as long as the spacing is adequate. Some of these are from Vancouver. I think the one at the top right there is from UBC, and they have just a stunning design on a coffee shop that was done to make it bird friendly. It's an area where people aren't really worried about the view, although it actually doesn't affect it that much from the inside, but it really makes an attractive outer facade for that building. Things like perforated film, this is like bus wrap. That means you can see from the inside out, but not from the outside in. Can be really useful, especially in situations where you want increased privacy as well. Screens and strings are really effective. The screens have to be on the outside, of course. Paracord, or really any string will work, is something that I've installed on some windows. And you essentially have these plastic bars at the top and bottom, and you attach string in between. And these are super easy to make, super cheap to make, and they can be taken up and down very easily for things like cleaning the windows. And they're very effective. This is something I was also super excited to see at a place I went to in Costa Rica that was there for birders, people who like to come and see birds. They had treated a lot of their windows with this. And I thought that was really great because, you know, they were protecting the birds that were drawing people to the area, but it's also a method that is very cheap. It doesn't require any real special material, but it's also very effective. This is something we're also seeing more and more as we have these oil-based paint markers, as well as other materials, is basically getting creative and drawing on windows. These are some examples that are done at houses at a smaller scale, but recently at Carleton University and University of Ottawa, there's been student groups that have used these on glass walkways to make them bird friendly. And so they've really put together these masterpieces that are both beautiful to look at and also prevent birds from colliding. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, things that don't work are these widely spaced decals or birds of prey. Birds don't recognize these birds of prey decals as being a bird of prey. It's just sort of a shape to them. And they won't hit where that decal is, but they'll hit around it. Similar with window alerts or other products, they do tell you to put them up every 2 inches apart. But of course, people generally don't do that because it would cover almost their entire window. So they tend to be really ineffective. Similarly, UV products are not very effective in most cases. It really is sort of the holy grail of preventing collisions, but the science isn't there yet. And sort of the theory behind this is that many bird species can see in the UV. So if we have UV products on our windows, they can see them and we can't. There's a few problems with this. The first is that not all species can see the UV. The second is that most collisions occur in the early morning when there's not a lot of UV present to reflect. And then there's also other issues like many of these alerts, besides not having an appropriate density, they say that you have to replace them every few months, which of course no one really does. So there's been very mixed testing results, including in one study showing that birds were more likely to hit the UV treated glass. So definitely an area of more research, but not something we recommend yet. So what can you do to help birds as an individual? The first thing is supporting bird-friendly legislation. Sorry, a bit of a typo there. And these are guidelines that tell developers, architects, how to make buildings bird friendly. And this is normally being done at the municipal level. However, there is, I know in Ontario, a push to have this included in the Ontario Building Code. And in order to know what to do, who should you write, that sort of thing, I would highly recommend following SafeWings and Flap on social media. There's often what we call action alerts where we ask people to write in and talk to their elected members of government at various different levels of government. But really talking to your city councilor, looking to see what there is in your community already, these are really important things. Sharing your knowledge is something that's really important. Talking about bird collision prevention, advocating for bird-friendly building design, as I mentioned, is more than just talking to officials, but also if there's development in your area, attending consultations, asking architects, how is this going to affect birds? Um, those are really important things. And on the right here, we have some examples. As I mentioned, there's a work going on to try and get Ontario's building code to include bird-friendly design. But also, on SafeWings, we post things where we ask people to write in, and we do see success with that in terms of uh, things passing in other areas in Ottawa itself, um, getting bird-friendly legislation on the table. Really, one of the most important things you can do is treating your windows and railings, anything that you can treat in your house. It's really fairly easy and fairly cheap to install things like the feather friendly, like the cord on the window on the left there. And not only does it protect birds at your house, but it can be a conversation starter, and people can say, "Oh, I have collisions. I didn't realize that there was something you could do about them." There's some really great examples of other materials at SafeWings, as well as FLAP and other resources like the American Bird Conservancy. Now, you may not be able to treat your windows. I know that this is an issue for people who might live in an apartment or in rented uh, buildings, but this is something where you can monitor, you can record birds, reporting collisions. If you're in Ottawa at the SafeWings website, if you're elsewhere, there's the global bird mapper. So you can really see where the hotspots are and work to reduce them. It's also something you can do is talk to your building manager, your condo board, your landlord, propose a solution. So the picture at the top there, they have these glass panels that worked as a wind block between every condo there. And a few very dedicated people on that condo board realized there was a problem, monitored for a bit and documented all the collisions, and then went to their condo board, said, "This is what it would take to stop these collisions. Can we do this?" And the condo board said yes. So we were really excited to see that. If you do have a bird that hits your house or window, or you find one, when you're out and about, that bird does need help. And the best thing you can do is grab it and put it in a paper bag, which surprises a lot of people. Um, but if you have a bird that is near a window and is not moving much, they tend to be sort of puffed up. They tend to be sort of squatted down and not really responsive to having a person near them. That bird is likely a bird that needs help. Putting it in a paper bag or a cardboard box is really the best thing you could do and get it to a wildlife rehabilitator. In Ottawa, SafeWings, the Wild Bird Care Center are great for that. There are rehabilitators across Ontario, not as many as maybe there could be. They could definitely use more, but if at all possible, getting an injured bird to a rehabber is really important. And one of the reasons for that, and this is a question we get all the time, is, half an hour after a bird collides, and people say, "It seems fine now. Can I let it go?" And this really reminds me of, if someone's in a car accident and has a head injury, well, they may try and leave that car accident and say they're fine, but you can like say, no, you should go and get checked out. And we see problems that take, 24, 48 hours to really become obvious. We've had a number of creepers, brown creepers, like in the picture in the bottom left there, that actually have a puncture in their air sac, sort of a bird lung. And every breath they take, they were getting air under their skin. And an hour later, you couldn't tell, but the next day, we actually had to essentially deflate them. And so that bird definitely would have died without care. Similarly, we have these eye injuries that really are not apparent right after a collision, but can impede the bird from escaping predators or finding food. So again, just a highlight to any bird that collides should go to a rehabber if possible. I'll just finish off here with some resources. If you'd like to contact me personally, that's my email. I'm with Safe Wings in Ottawa. But a few other things that I referred to during the talk, there's a website there for if you want to report a collision that really does help identify hotspots. Lots of information about collisions from various sources, as well as organizations that work to reduce collisions. Something I will just highlight is also the Bird Friendly Cities program, which is not just focusing on window collisions, but making our cities safer for birds in general. So there's lots of these programs happening in cities across Canada. So you can take a look and see if that's something that you might want to help out with, because those programs are really helping to try and make cities less of a danger for birds. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. And yeah, I guess, Monica, I don't know if there's questions for me.
Awesome. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Willow, for this presentation. A ton of great information, really great visuals, and just making it really clear all of the different ways that people can hop in and help our birds. And also, if they're not in the Ottawa area, different ideas that they can maybe take with them to bring action in their own community. So really appreciative of your time and sharing all your knowledge. There is going to be a survey link dropped in the chat by Nicole, just letting us know how today went for you. If you have any ideas for future speakers or future topics, that would be the place to put them. Willow, there were a number of questions submitted ahead of time. I've got to say that you answered a lot of them in your presentation. There are a couple left, so we'll just go through them quickly. The first one is about Safe Wings. So I know the logo, it's Safe Wings Ottawa. So are there other Safe Wing chapters, or do you have ideas or resources for people to try and bring a similar organization to their community if they're not in Ottawa?
So there are, well, Safe Wings is only in Ottawa. There are other organizations that are like Safe Wings, and in some cases predate Safe Wings, like FLAP is in Toronto. There's in Calgary, there's an organization. I know in a lot of places, this Bird Friendly Cities program is focusing on collisions, and so that is a great place to start. But yeah, there's definitely not as many as there could be. But talking to some of the bigger organizations like FLAP or Safe Wings and seeing if they know if they're of one in your community, or taking a look at this Nature Canada Bird Friendly Cities program and seeing if anything is happening there in your community are great places to start.
Awesome. We have a question. It was probably near the beginning when you were talking about the different types of windows, like the corner windows, and how there's the transparency and the reflection. So someone's wondering if there is a specific type of window that is the most danger, specifically south or north facing, or is it more about the type of window that poses the most risk?
Yeah, this is another sort of common misconception about collisions, in terms of a lot of people might think that you would get more collisions on north-facing windows when birds are migrating south and vice versa. That's not so much the case because birds tend to collide as not while they're actually migrating, but while they're using an area, either to feed as a stopover site or because they've been drawn in by light pollution. In terms of the most dangerous, I would say in general, if I was trying to design a building to kill birds, I would probably put up mirrored glass and have it face vegetation and water and a bird feeder. But it really depends on the context. The one that was at the National Gallery was really almost exclusively a transparency problem, but it was super dangerous because it was in between areas of green space with fruiting trees. And so that one, it was really not reflections, which is where we tend to see the most of the problem.
Okay, our next question is about one of your slides. I think it was near the beginning. You had a statistic that said that 70% of the birds die on impact, and someone's just
Yes,
wondering where the stat came from.
that is a good question. That probably comes from our data in terms of the percentage of birds that we find that are alive versus dead. We tend to find a lot more dead birds. There have been a few studies that have looked at that, but it's really hard to quantify the number that hit and then fly away, um, because you just wouldn't, unless you happen to see the impact and see them fly away, you wouldn't ever find them and be able to count them. There is more and more research happening, not enough yet, but definitely there is more happening, including some with cameras, and those are better able to quantify because they can see these birds that are hitting and flying away. But in general, the numbers are coming from the percent that we find alive versus dead, as well as a few studies that have looked more in depth at that.
The next question is about Safe Wings collecting the birds and the statistics that you gather. So there was a lot of information in the presentation about downtown surveys, and people are wondering if they have a collision at their home, are they able to still call Safe Wings? Do those birds get put into the stats, or are the surveys more for downtown only?
So the stats include all of the birds that get reported to us or documented. So probably uh, the majority of the birds that we get come from our collision hotspots, which are downtown and Canada in the Ottawa area. There are a few other individual buildings that are a bit more scattered, but we do still ask people who have collisions at their home to report them. Um, we aren't always able to collect the birds just because we have limited volunteer resources, and so we try and save having drivers for live birds. But we have a number of drop-off locations throughout the city, and we use the bird carcasses for our display, and then they're donated to museums, so they're used for science later on. But certainly, we do hope that people will continue to report them. And if you're not in Ottawa, reporting them in the bird mapper is a really great alternative.
Awesome. So that's all of the questions that were not covered by your presentation already. So just to let everyone know, there will be a handout going out with the recording from today's session, which will hyperlink a lot of the resources that Willow has mentioned, as well as some of the studies. So if you didn't get all of the links down, don't worry. We'll be sending that handout early next week. And same with the recording so that you can share that or post that anywhere where you would maybe have a community group, a school, any sort of people that you can get together to take local action. So again, thank you so much, Willow, for a fantastic presentation today. Thank you everyone for joining, and you can look forward to that email in your inboxes next week.
Thanks, Monica. And thank you everyone for attending.